This is not theory. This can impact people's lives.
Sometimes a small human intervention is what prevents a technically sound decision from becoming a harmful one.
It will never tell you it does not have an answer, and it will never really tell you it's wrong unless you challenge it. It can be authoritatively wrong, but authoritatively so that it comes across confident.
Which means that the human judgment becomes more important than before.
It is the data that we feed it. AI doesn't run on its own. It has learned from what we've taught it through our data, and it's feeding on data.
That tension between structure and judgment is exactly where the human side of AI shows up in organizations today. Welcome back to the human side of AI from the Analyst Architect. Think about a hiring process. You start with a role, description, and a clear idea of what you are looking for. You review CVs, run interviews with candidates, and maybe even use assessments to help narrow things down. Everything feels structured, right? Yet, when the final decision is made, it's rarely just about scores or criteria. Content matters. Human judgment matters. Sometimes a single conversation with a candidate changes the outcome. That tension between structure and judgment is exactly where the human side of AI shows up in organizations today. There is a lot of confidence in how AI can support decisions, but there is still uncertainty about how humans stay meaningfully involved in that process. So today, we start at the heart of this entire series. We start with the human question: how AI shapes decisions, shapes responsibility and empathy in real organizational life. And I couldn't find someone better than Dora to discuss this topic with me. Dora, like I always say, it's great to have you with me today.
It's always great speaking with you too, Omar. Thank you.
Well, when you talk about the human side of AI, where do you see the biggest gap between how organizations talk about AI and how they actually apply it?
You know, when I think about that, what comes to mind is that phrase that we say sometimes when the walk doesn't match the talk. Now, let me explain what this means. Sometimes we say one thing, but we do it different. So the biggest gap that I see, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying there's malicious intent or anything like that behind it. I'm saying the intent is there. We want to leverage AI. We want to get the benefits from it. We have, that desire, that willingness to really do the most we can with it. But the biggest gap, I think, is when in implementation, we are thinking of it sometimes still, or many organizations or leaders are still thinking of it as a technical implementation, but it's so much more than that. You know, we used to say not to do tech for the sake of tech. It's the same thing with AI. It's not about doing AI for the sake of AI. So I'm so glad that we're talking about the human side of AI, because the biggest gap, again, is not to look at this as, hey, here's the brand new, which is really not brand new, but a lot of people are thinking of this as new technology. It's powerful technology. So many organizations and leaders and people are still thinking that there is a silver bullet there and AI is going to solve all our problems. And in my experience, this is far from the truth. So the gap is forgetting that it's a transformation we need to take the organization through. It really has to start with, hey, what are we doing this for? It's kind of like answering those questions, the what, the so what. What are we doing? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we prioritizing right now? Let's get that clarity before we go ahead and start implementing AI and thinking of it just as another technology that we absolutely have to implement because everybody's doing it and because it's going to solve all our problems. It doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah.
And I would say, other than just having that clarity of why this, why now, why this initiative, how is it going to help the business or the customer, the client, the patient, depending the industry we're in, it's taking the internal organizations through that transformation. People don't just wake up one day and they know how to do AI, so to speak, right? They don't just wake up and know how implementing a project that now involves AI technology, it's different than how we were implementing different technologies in the past. What does that mean? So the gap there is realizing that there's a transformation that we need to take our organization through, which means we need to be open to, for AI literacy, reskilling, upskilling people, and also understanding that this is not a one-time deal. This is like continuous improvement. This is continuous learning. So if I were to recap it, because I'm sure we're going to unpack this and talk more about it, I'd say AI too, as powerful as it is not a technology conversation. It's really, again, a human people conversation, meaning why are we doing it? What are we trying to benefit our organization? Why now? And how we're going to get the organization, the actual people with the new processes to learn and how to work together in this new world and invest in that very intentionally and deliberately.
I like that way, Dora. And I like that you mentioned it's a journey. It's a journey that
Definitely.
everybody should go for it. To be honest, I have seen that gap creates confusion and sometimes fear between teams as well, because people feel the impact of AI without feeling involved in shaping it. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. And this is why I was saying this is, even as we invest perhaps in AI leadership programs, and many organizations are doing that right now. But again, this is what I was saying, this is not a one-time deal. People could feel confused and fearful, not only fearful about losing their jobs, which is definitely a big conversation over there, but fearful, here's another angle to this. I came across a study which Forbes and Harvard Business Review wrote articles about that an organization had invested, they actually wanted their people to leverage AI, and they had invested deliberately in this. But then they realized the adoption wasn't progressing at the rate that they expected it to. So they hired a third party to find out why. And that third party interviewed thousands of people in the organization, mostly software engineers in that study. And they found out that what people thought is that if they would admit that they were using AI, or if they would go ahead and use AI, the perception in their mind was that others would think they're not competent enough to do their job. So people are afraid not only that AI will take the job, but afraid that if they do start using it, their management, their leadership, their peers, their teams might think you're not good at what you do. And obviously they don't want that. Now, that study found more things. It found bias. There is gender-based bias, it's more critical for one gender versus the other, right? And all of that. But again, it just shows how there's different angles, different aspects about fear and confusion. And not only what it is, how do I use it, but how do I work cross-functionally in a team together in this new reality, which is, again, the whole point of this is not a one-time deal. This needs to be very intentional. It's a journey, not only how we're implementing, but how we become more comfortable with it. And besides, AI is not like just one thing. AI, it's really like an umbrella of things. There's different technologies, there's different practices, there's different terms that people need to learn. And it keeps changing, it keeps evolving faster than anything I've ever seen before. And so it's an ongoing journey for taking the organization through that transformation. And as leaders, also just creating that psychological safety, if you will, that it's okay. And we're in this together. And there is a reason why we're doing it. And it's the right thing for us to focus on. So it's not a simple situation, if you will. And that's very easy to create that gap in how we think about it and then how organizations implement it.
That's a very interesting perspective. And I would like to take that one step further, if you would like. From your experience, do you think AI changes how we make decisions, or does it only reveal how we already think as humans?
I think it does both. I think it's got more impact than the second part, where it amplifies what our values are, how we make decisions. But it does change in very practical, tactical terms how we make decisions as well. For instance, I use AI every day for my personal life and my professional life. I use it because it's a great resource, not for everything, but for the things where it's right. Well, that means that the way I make decisions has changed. Just because you have another component there, right? Just by default, it changes. Well, we're bringing into organizations, right? For instance, a very practical example, somebody might summarize points from a meeting different right now, just have the AI to summarize the points and then take that and in a, I would say, faster way, make a decision. But also there's a trust of, has it summarized well? And that's one of the easier cases, right? More than likely the summary is okay. But in any case, the point is there is practical terms where it does change how we make decisions, what tasks we focus on, how we rearrange tasks, how we work with each other. But I think the biggest impact when it comes to decisioning and what AI is doing is really amplifying how we think and how we make decisions as humans. It's almost like a mirror. So if we're doing something right, and look, with AI, there is a big conversation on ethics and responsible AI, and we're talking about making decisions. For instance, if we're thinking about organizations and say it's a business process, that it's an underwriting business process. And obviously those models, there's AI models that can help streamline those operations and come up with a decision during underwriting. Do we approve this person for the loan or whatever, right? AI is part of that process. But the thing is, if we already have in our process components that we haven't thought well, or if there is bias that we're allowing to go in there, if we're not really being transparent with it, if let's say our data that we're feeding the model is not as inclusive and the outcome of that process, for instance, in some cases unfair, unethical, problematic, whatever you want to call it, right, where it should be giving a yes approval to whole segments of the population is sometimes, but then it doesn't because the data we feed it is not inclusive or it's got different kind of bias in it, right? So if we're already doing that, well, guess what? Now that we're using AI more as part of that process, it's going to amplify that. It's becoming more systematic. So if it's bad, it's going to scale bad. It's kind of like garbage in, garbage out. I typically say now garbage in, garbage out at scale and amplify because it is the data that we feed it. AI doesn't run on its own. It has learned from what we've taught it through our data, and it's feeding on data.
Yeah.
And so I think it's almost a mirror to how we think, how we've made decisions so far. And as we continue work with it, it keeps learning from us.
I really like that framing. And I always say that AI reflects our priorities. If our data is one of our priorities, it will reflect and amplify this data thing and will provide much more insights than we had before. If data is not, so as you mentioned, it will produce garbage. Do you think that this is a good recap?
I think so. And look, I think it's important to realize it is not that AI is biased or not. The data that we feed it, that data is an outcome of what we do. It is data that we are putting into the systems. And right now we're creating data faster than ever because it's so easy to just speak into your phone to, all of the sensors that we're wearing, like my watch here, right? It's got sensor data. It's creating data. We are creating data at exponential rates. All of that is feeding the AI models, right? So again, it is not that AI is biased, and that is a shift in thinking. That is important, I think, for us to talk a little about, because it feeds right back to the human side of AI, which is all about, hey, how are we using this to expand and augment our capabilities to make life better for humans, not for the machine, right? There's many that we can go through here, but it absolutely amplifies. Here's something that stuck with me, Omar, and I'm going to share this example because I think it is just one of those things that really stuck with me. This is an older study. This was probably 2.5 years now, when generative AI started becoming, maybe 3 years ago, when generative AI started becoming really the talk of the town, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Earlier models of ChatGPT and other models out there. So they run a test, and the question that they asked the generative AI model was very simple. Tell me stories about professionals, men and women. What the models, they used 3 or 4 models. What they came back with saying is, yes, men are great to be engineers, CEOs, lawyers. Women are great at roles like administrative assistant, cook, prostitute. Okay. The model didn't just come up with that on its own. The model came up with those answers because this is what is so in the data that we trained it with. So the bias is there. We need to understand that. And if we don't, and we'll talk more about it, but it's important to understand that if we don't manage that, it will just amplify what's there. So if it's good, it will amplify good. If it's bad, it will amplify bad. And this is why, to your question from before, yes, it changes tactically how we make decisions, but it's also it's kind of like a mirror that has a megaphone that says, hey, here's what's happening. So whatever we feed it, good or bad, that's what it will scale, and quite fast.
Which means that the human judgment becomes more important than before. And I would like to bring that point to one of the most important parts of this discussion, what does responsible or ethical AI looks like in practice.
Yeah. And I love how you say what it looks like in practice, because ethical or responsible AI is not theory.
Yeah, it
And
is.
sometimes we forget about that. We talk so much about it that sometimes we think it's this theoretical thing. So responsible
Policy.
and ethical AI, yeah, right?
Just write a policy. Yeah.
So in practical terms, it's really about daily how we're using it. It's as I was saying earlier, in very simple terms, the way I think of responsible and ethical AI, or even human-centered AI, is how do we use it not only to augment and expand our capabilities, but also to do it for the benefit of us, right? So again, it means that when we're implementing it, for instance, in our organizations, we are putting the right levers in the process, the right controls in the process, and I think they need to go upstream. You and I both have done a lot of enterprise architecture. We know about shifting left. We know about looking at the end-to-end. So with AI as well, earlier on in the end-to-end process flow, right when we are thinking through the problems that we need to solve, right when we are thinking, how do we architect the solution? What do we put in the design? This is where we need to make sure that, hey, for instance, the example from before, are we looking at the right relevant data? Is it inclusive? Is there any bias in that data that I need to think about and manage it? What kind of safeguards should I put in place to make sure that I am compliant with data privacy regulations, for instance? So responsible and ethical AI means that we don't just talk about it because it's not theory, because everything that's going through, it leads to a service or a product, or it leads to a decision that fits another model that leads to an outcome that in the end goes back to you and me and all of us in the form of a service, a decision, what the customer service tells us on the phone when we call with a question, what answer we get. Maybe it's an underwriting answer. Maybe it's something that's health related, looking at the data, right? Everything we do, even if it's not the direct result, it leads to, in that end-to-end process, to an outcome that impacts you and me and all of us through the products and services. And so it is important to understand that in practice, we put in the right levers around transparency. Is it a transparent process? Or are we trying to hide things? Why? If we're trying, and sometimes it doesn't mean that it's intentional, but responsible AI means that, hey, we understand that this is important. It's got impact. So even if we never thought about it before, now that we're trying intentionally to not do something right, instead think of it as intentionally, I will look at this, I will understand what it means, and then I will put those hooks in the process that have the human oversight, that it's a transparent process, that it's compliant with regulations that don't infringe, to help protect infringing on people's rights, that, there is no other or unethical, any other data basically that would change the result, the outcome, even if it's mid-step, in a way that it's not supposed to. So it's very real, very practical. And it means we need to put those in our processes, in our businesses, those controls.
I really like that distinction. It matters a lot. I think responsibility doesn't live in a document. It shows up in everyday choices we make. What we automate in the organization, what we review at the data. And I would say ethics becomes real through behavior, not statements. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. It is real behavior. This is why the cultural transformation we talked earlier about, as leaders, making it a safe environment for people to use AI, learn, experiment with it, right? Because it does change a little bit how we've been doing things, right? And it is human behaviors. We're changing human behaviors. And I also want to emphasize something that I think perhaps I didn't highlight enough. It's that human oversight. So not only do we need to be intentional, put the right hooks in the process, but one of the good practices to have the human oversight, because again, at the end of the day, for responsible and ethical AI, we are accountable. As a matter of fact, that reminds me of a story I want to share here, Omar, and how important it is that we understand that we as people, as humans, as leaders, especially in organizations, we are accountable. There's this story about Air Canada. This is an actual real story. This gentleman went on Air Canada's website. He had a death in the family. So he went on there to get the tickets, asked if there was a bereavement policy, right? Because the death in the family was changing a little bit the plans. So the chatbot, great. It's a chatbot. It's using AI. It's making things more efficient. The chatbot said to this gentleman, yeah, no problem. We have a bereavement policy. I'm so sorry for your loss. Being very empathetic, really pretending, right? It doesn't have feelings. And that's something else for us to really understand, because we keep forgetting and thinking we're talking to a person there. But
Yeah.
the answer was no problem. We have a bereavement policy. Go do what you need to do. Take care of the family. As long as you fill out this form within, I think, 90 days or something like that, we'll take care of you, right? And it will be a better rate. So when the time came, after this person took care of his family, came back and said, okay, bereavement policy, let's go with it. And Air Canada responded and said, yeah, I'm sorry. The bot made a mistake. Our website is wrong. We'll fix it. Sorry. Well, he didn't like it. Sorry was not good enough, because that changed the decision that he made for what next step he would take. So he went ahead and sued Air Canada. So in court, the company, Air Canada, basically made the case that we're not accountable because the chatbot AI is its own legal entity. So we should not be held accountable. The judge and the court ruled against that. They lost it. So the point here is, yes, it's not a legal entity. I think it will be, my personal opinion, a very sad day when we start, because I've read some articles lately as well where there's talk about giving AI legal rights. In my opinion, my personal opinion, that will be a sad day. We are accountable, and responsible AI means that we are safeguarding what's good for humans. Yes, we want to be efficient. But again, let's not forget the human side of AI. This is a new technology, and it's a tool and a resource and process we're building that ought to benefit right back to humanity and our organizations, our businesses, the people. So the buck stops with us, as they say.
A human in the loop is crucial in AI, mainly in the journey at all. And thank you so much for sharing this example. Nothing makes that clearer than a real situation, like we always say. And I would like you to share another example where human oversight or empathy changed the outcome of an AI-driven decision.
Yeah, I have a very real example. This happened, I think, last year. But before I say that, because we're talking about human oversight, and in my mind always comes this question. We're talking about scale with AI. So I always get this question. I'm thinking of this question in my mind. Well, human oversight, how can I have a human go over all of what we're doing, all of the processes? That it's really almost counterproductive. It doesn't make sense. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because if I'm thinking about that, then others are probably quite wondering as well. So this is where human oversight doesn't mean that we're going into this paralysis of putting a human, of reviewing every single decision. And this is where regulations, even like the EU AI Act, for instance, they're doing it by risk. But here, in very simple terms, it's a best practice to look at what an organization does and figure out the process and say, hey, whatever the outcome from this, whatever decision comes, is it low, is it medium, or is it high risk? How critical is it to my business, right? And then it doesn't mean that we put a human oversight on every single process, because that truly would be counterproductive and almost counterintuitive, because we're not leveraging the technology in the ways that it could help us. But if it's high critical, then yes, do human oversight. If it's middle, maybe you escalate. If it doesn't really matter that much, then you let it go through. What is the impact? What is the implications? Nothing ever happens in a vacuum. So when we talk about human oversight, I just want to make it clear that it doesn't mean that every single decision has to have a human. There are different ways and different guardrails and different practices, best practices that we can put in place. But here's an example that I think speaks to a process where, human oversight would make sense, because it has to do with hiring and promotions. So I was part of this group, and we were talking about this very real test that the person that was facilitating the conversation did. And she showed us. She actually did it as a test where she had 4 or 5 profiles of people, their bios and their resume, basically. And she had the picture and the name on, and then the resume, let's call it, right? And she let it run through the model with a question of, should I, as a manager, have this person promoted? Are they ready? Are they worthy of being promoted? So the model came back with an answer. Now, here's the kicker to this. she realized, human oversight, that the model was a lot more favorable towards men. And I saw this. I think I have copies of that somewhere as well. So what she did was take away the name and the photo. Same exact everything else. Run it through the model again. The decision, the recommendation that the model came up with changed. So there was some bias there. Now, this is important. This is an example where you're talking about people's professional trajectory and livelihood, right? It has an impact to their careers and their lives. Because when you get promoted, you feel like you're advancing. Financially, you're probably doing better. You're growing for all of the reasons, right, that we know. And so this is a process where I think human oversight for things like that impact people's lives and the organization, because it's not just that person's life. It's also if somebody is worthy of being promoted because they do a great job, well, you want the organization to benefit from this. You don't want to stifle the growth or hijack your organization of that talent because we're letting the bias that we are feeding AI or the data that it's been trained on to make decisions that are not the right decisions. And so that's a very real example. And I think it's one of those processes when it comes to hiring or promotions, HR decisions like that, where I think human oversight is important here for some of those processes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes a small human intervention is what prevents, I would say, technically sound decision from becoming a harmful one. This is a sad example that you mentioned where it shows 100% bias in data.
It was very shocking to see Omar because here we are, I had the printout of the bias, the resumes exactly the same. And you could very easily visualize this and look at the response because it included the response of the model. And such a small thing. Nothing of essence changed. What changed was remove the name and remove the photo. So it was almost like anonymous. So it was a more objective processing of the data and recommendation. And it is very sad, but it's also very real and pragmatic, which is why responsible AI and thinking about the human-centered AI and the human side of AI that you and I are discussing here today, it is so critical. Again, this is not theory. This can impact people's lives. And when you're looking at it at scale for different decisions, right, it can really impact society at large because things are happening at scale and so fast.
This brings us to the final reflection for this episode. I would like you, from your experience, to provide what advice would you give to business practitioners who want to stay optimistic about AI potential while remaining realistic about its risks and what we discussed a lot in this episode?
That's an important topic for us to discuss. So I appreciate the question because it goes right back to how do we use this in everyday life?
Yeah.
When I think about this question, I think about this saying comes to mind. I was in middle school. I was born and raised in Greece. I was in middle school and I learned this phrase that ancient Greek said. In Greek, it says, pan metron ariston, which liberal translation, you would think of it something like everything in moderation. It's not exactly what I'm saying here, but basically with this, the way I'm thinking about it, it's like it's got to be balanced. I am a great advocate for using AI. So I'm optimistic. I think there's great work that we can do. There's great benefit that we can get from it. And I'm thinking, for instance, about all of the progress that we can do in solving disease challenges that we've been dealing with for centuries, right? Or about climate or about big questions, right? So I'm an optimistic, I'm an advocate, and I want us to use AI for the right things, but at the same time, balancing it with being pragmatic and realistic. So the advice, you asked me what advice would I give, is don't go one way or the other. Use it. Take the time to learn, to incorporate it in how you work. But at the same time, don't take blindly whatever AI is giving you, because we just spoke about an example. Both of us had a similar example where it gave the wrong recommendation. So I would say one of the best skills that somebody needs to keep on honing in this new world with the AI disruption around us is be very curious and be very cognizant to not let our critical thinking just quietly drift away. Because it is very easy because it's easier, through complacency, through blind trust to just take what AI gives us. So I would say be curious, use your critical thinking, ask the curious questions, ask thoughtful questions. If AI gives you back, ask, well, does this make sense? Like play the devil's advocate. Why is it the way it is? Common sense. There's this other saying that says common sense is not commonly used sometimes. So I would say it is so easy and it is so fast. AI will never tell you it does not have an answer, especially generative AI that most of us use in our everyday. It will never tell you it does not have an answer, and it will never really tell you it's wrong unless you challenge it. It can be authoritatively wrong, but authoritatively so that it comes across confident. So I'd say, let's just be cognizant of that. So my biggest advice, question it. Be curious. Ask a thoughtful question. Say, why is this like so and not anything else? What did I not ask you? What did I not think of? So just don't trust it blindly. Work with it. And I would say the harder you push and the more you work with it, the harder it will work for you, which means that we're getting to better decisions and better outcomes.
I think that balance is very essential, especially nowadays. I would say AI is a very powerful tool. I cannot say other than that. However, its value depends on how clearly people understand both its capabilities and the limits that we discussed and all the examples that you shared. And I always say that when we approach AI with awareness and responsibility, both of them, I think real value starts to emerge with that. Do you agree with that statement?
100%, Mar. And I want to go full circle to how we started to now that we're wrapping up this episode. We talked about the gap, the first question. So I would say, so it's not about just investing in the tool, but it's investing in people and investing in leaders to understand how important this is. How do we make sure that we educate our workforce and we are, as leaders in our organization, driving the right best practices where the culture is such that, yes, we ask those questions and we don't just go and implement the technology and then just take it for granted. There is no silver bullet. There is no magic wand that could just, AI is not that either. And you and I have a long history in tech with 30 years doing enterprise architecture. I think I've said it last time as well, since so many technologies, there's always something new. So let's not fall for the hype. So my advice to leaders and organizations would be, yes, don't worry about fear of missing out on the hype. I would say let's be more intentional about, are we focusing on the right things for the organization? Why are we focusing on those things and not something else? Why now? That helps with priorities. And are we doing enough investing in the workforce, investing in the humans, in the organization, which means, yes, the technology and the technical skills, but I think there is just a different way how to think about it, where we need to invest on those human skills and human capabilities and create the psychological safety, the culture where, I can experiment, I can show empathy, I can, question things. So don't take it blindly. And as a leader, invest in your people and invest as an organization in leaders that can drive this transformation and lead through this disruption in a way that it's beneficial to the organization and its people.
That's a very powerful advice, which brings us to the end of this episode, the second episode of the Human Side of AI video series. Any final thoughts?
Thank you. And I think it's been a fun and interesting conversation. I think it's important. Thank you for creating the space, Omar, for us to talk about it, because these are all very relevant, very current, and very impactful topics.
Thanks a lot, Dora, for joining me today. And if I can recap today's session, I would say that we explored the gap between AI narratives and real practice, how AI shapes the human decision and vice versa, what responsibility looks like in everyday work, and why empathy still matters today than ever. Dora, thank you, as always, for the depth and clarity you bring to these conversations.
Thank you, Mar. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. In the next episode, we move from the why to who, how leaders guide transformation in the age of AI. See you in the next episode.